Good morning, all. My name is Andrew B. Watt, and I'm coming to you from Western Massachusetts. Today, I want to go through some material that I did not have a chance to do during yesterday's um, year ahead forecast with the Arnemancy podcast, and I've just shared the wrong presentation. And what I'm after here is to provide you who are signed up for my Patreon with a look at the year ahead from a different perspective than the one that we do for the Arnemancy podcast. In the Arnemancy podcast, we draw a tarot card for each month, and I look at a chart for each month that's based on the vulgar calendar year, based on what happens at midnight on January 1st when the clock changes over from December 31st um, to January 1st, and then go forward from there. For those of you who are relatively new to the podcast, I also want to offer a little bit of the flavor of who I am as a teacher. So I'm going to begin in this way, assuming I can get my stuff all lined up here. And maybe see what you all are seeing. That would be good. Yeah. So you should see me in the screen, and you should also see this little slideshow that I've prepared for you. First of all, I started studying magic in 1990 or so. This is a tricky thing to measure, is learning magic tricks while you're working as a babysitter at the age of 12 or 13 also magic? It's hard to know. I started studying astrology about 2010. I went pro in 2016 and started seeing clients, and I started publishing the column, which is probably how you found me in 2019. In my mundane career, I was a seminarian in the Episcopal Church for a little while. I spent 20 years as a middle school teacher, and I also spent 11 years in a high level of leadership in Toastmasters International, the public speaking and leadership training organization. I usually like to start my astrology things by using the astrologer's prayer that I wrote based on a piece of the writing of the Hellenistic era Latin writer Firmicus Maternus. Sun best and greatest, heaven's middle heat, who minds and moderates, leads and commands, who sets stars whirling to the cosmic beat and makes harmony with diligent hands. You also, moon in heaven's lowest range, in dignity mirroring solar rays and constantly stirring the seed to sprout, and also Saturn at heaven's far grange, who leadenly numbers all mortal days and turns lively youth to desert and drought. And Jupiter, too, on law's rocky ledge, who gladdens earth and with mercy tempers the deeds of Mars, who delights in sword's edge, the wounded men's cries, the captive's whimpers. Hail to you, too, Venus, who loves and laughs, and Mercury, too, of quicksilver tongue, faithful companions of sun on his road. Said good governance among noble crafts, both in distant provinces far flung and wherever leaders make their abode. Make their decisions lucky and informed, tending to good and posterity's need, rather than by personal vice deformed the longings of lust and envy and greed. Instead, breathe essence of godly genius into our lungs when we speak of the stars or expound out the wisdom of sages. Though astrology seems mysterious, let my words be skillful at healing scars, launching loves and careers, or breaking cages. Let's get started. In order to understand how to read what's called a mundane astrology chart, you need to know something about how that is done. Here's the basic way that it works. We look at the moment that the sun enters Aries, which usually happens around March 20th, March 21st, plus or minus about 17 hours. Sometimes it's as early as the 19th, though that's rare. Sometimes it's as late as the early morning of the 22nd. That's also rare. And then we look to the ascendant of that chart. If the ascendant is in a fixed sign, that is to say, in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, or Aquarius, that chart describes conditions in that place for the next 12 months. So if we look at the chart for Washington, D.C., this describes overall conditions for the United States for a 12-month period. If we look at a chart and it's got a cardinal sign, that is to say, Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, that chart is good for 6 months. And then you have to renew the chart in September at the autumn equinox. If the chart has has a mutable sign, that is to say, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, as the rising sign, as where the ascendant is located, that chart is only good for 3 months. And you have to renew that chart every 3 months for the entire year. So you'll do it at the four quarter days. You'll do it at the spring equinox, the fall equinox, but also the summer and winter solstice. And each of those charts will be good for 3 months until the next time rolls around. Despite all of the craziness that has occurred in the United States over the past year, it's surprising that on March 20th, 2025, at just about 5 a.m., that we had the ascendant in a fixed sign, which means that this chart represented what was going to happen for an entire 12-month period. That is to say, from March of 2025 until March of 2026. Aquarius is associated with the work that happens before the work. It's not building a building. It's getting the gravel from the yard and cutting down the timber that's going to become the 2x4s that build the structure. It is not plowing the field. It is sharpening the tools in preparation for plowing the field and replacing all of the broken or rotted axe handles and sharpening the axe and cleaning the rust off of the tools and that sort of thing. So it's a very different kind of experience where people are knowledgeable about what's going on, but they still need to focus on doing the preliminaries. The second thing that you look at in an Aries Ingress chart is what the sun is doing, and that usually represents what the head of state is doing. And that means that you're in a position to identify what is going to be the major piece of the head of state's domestic policy agenda. The third thing that you look for is what the moon is doing, because the moon will tell you what portion of the populace is able to make their opinions known and what are they doing. And then once you've looked at the ascendant, the sun, and the moon, you walk through the houses. I'm going to do this for the chart for 2025 because it's only one chart, because we've got the ascendant in a fixed sign. And then we're going to look at why 2026 is likely to be a little bit of a turbulent year for the United States. And hopefully you will get enough from this that you can look at the chart for your home state, your home province, your own country, if you live in a country other than the United States, or you can even do it for your own specific city, because this system scales down to any political division that you might happen to be involved in. In the Aries Ingress chart of March 20th at 5 a.m. over Washington, D.C., the big thing that we have to pay attention to is the fact that the ascendant is in Aquarius. And this first decan of Aquarius, as some of you know, is called the mark of exile. It represents the idea of criticism from within a system, but also criticism of the system by people who claim to be outsiders, but are actually deeply embedded in the system. And I think it's really interesting that when it comes to the people, which is what the first house represents in a chart, is the ordinary citizenry and residents of a given country, that the billionaires are above the horizon and making their opinions known on a very large scale and kind of controlling the discourse. And that's represented here by Pluto in Aquarius at the very top of the chart. Now, later on, in Pluto's time in Aquarius, Pluto is less likely to represent billionaires and more likely to represent the workforce. And there's lots of reasons for that. But for now, be aware that this symbol doesn't represent the labor force so much as it represents the forces that control the labor force. And uh, and if people are interested in that, I'll talk about that at some other point. But here, that's the function that it's having, is saying the billionaires are controlling the discourse and saying, you know, this is a system worth critiquing and criticizing, and it's worth checking out and controlling that. Why is that the case? Why does Pluto have an overriding concern about what happens in Aquarius? And the answer has to do with where Saturn is. Saturn is in Pisces at this moment, and Pisces is the next sign. Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius, but it's in a sign that is adjacent to, and therefore in a state of being called in conjunction or out of alignment or in aversion. It's kind of like Saturn has moved on from home. He's fussing with his car keys in the driveway and he's getting ready to drive away. His mind is not on what's happened just recently in Aquarius, and he's getting ready to leave, and his attention is elsewhere. He won't be able to really think about what's going on in Aquarius until he's moved into Aries, and by that point, it may be a little bit too late. The second thing that we look at after we've looked at what's happening to the ascendant, the first house, is we look to the sun, because what the sun is doing tells us something about what it is that the head of state, in the case of the US, the president, is going to do. If we were looking at the chart of Great Britain, we would look to the chart and we would say, okay, what is the king going to be doing? What is King Charles III going to be doing? And in the case of Ireland, we would look at the president of Ireland as being the head of state. In a lot of countries, the head of state and the head of government are two separate individuals. In the United States, those powers are combined into a single office. Uh, and you would look at other planets like Jupiter and Saturn in order to look at the prime minister and the shadow prime minister, or the head of the opposition party. And generally, you would look to the Jupiter as the head of government, and Saturn as the head of the opposition. One of them always saying yes, 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 and the other saying no, no, no. The sun in this particular case is in the third house, suggesting that the president is going to be very much focused on a domestic policy agenda. And that's what we saw here in the US, right? We saw an enormous amount of effort on the part of the government at the start of 2025 to cut back on wasteful government spending, to pull back from the infrastructure bill commitments that had been made, and to focus on communications and transport and infrastructure. And in this particular case, we've got Venus and Mercury both retrograde, that is to say, moving towards the president and, in a sense, opposing him, but not able to overcome the sun's natural capacity to rule and run things. So we saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We saw, although I think that happened in 2024, we saw we've seen a lot of attacks on LGBTQ identity. We've seen a lot of efforts to limit healthcare, to transport people out of the country, and a lot of stuff like that. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. So we've now looked at what's happening with the ascendant representing the broad body of people in the country. We've looked at the sun. Now we look at the moon. And the moon is up here in Sagittarius. It represents the portion of the population that is able to make its feelings known and to have some kind of long-term effect on policy. And in this particular case, it's in the 11th house, in which is the part of the chart that is associated both with the national legislature, that is to say, Congress and the House of Representatives and the Senate on the one hand, but also state governments. And so what this is saying is that if you really want to affect change in the United States, you have to work on Congress, you have to work through your representatives and your senators, but you also should have a level of focus on what's happening in your own state legislature. And that's where real change is capable of being affected. So that's kind of the way that we look at these charts, is we look at those three positions first, and then we can do what I call walking the houses. We walk the houses rather than we walk through the houses individually rather than trying to identify what each planet is doing, because it's a lot easier to tell the story by walking the houses in a mundane or judicial astrology chart than it is to walk through them planet by planet. And I've done that here, right? Second house of finance and sort of the economy of the country contains Saturn and Neptune. So we have austerities for some people, but we also have Neptune, visionary possibilities and fantasies. So there's harsh realities, right? Financial austerity and inflation have made a lot of people's lives harder. But Neptune says that the reality hasn't sunk in yet. People haven't yet really figured out where they are and what's going on. And memory and hope are still fighting with one another over what this is going to look like long term. Third house, I've already spoken a little bit about. The president is bowling through a bunch of domestic affairs throughout 2025. Venus represents women's rights. Mercury represents both professional expertise, but also the rights of LGBTQ plus people. And both of those planets are going to wind up being eclipsed or covered by sunlight, and the sun is just going to get what he wants. Not great. And again, from the perspective of what the chart is saying, from our perspective on the ground, all of this looks very tumultuous. But from the perspective of the astrology chart, this has been a steady pressure all through the year in the last 9 months. And remember that we still have January, February, and March still to go, where this is the steady state experience. Fourth, agriculture, containing Uranus and also having Venus, the ruler of Taurus, be in conjunct or in aversion in Aries next door. So disruptions to food, disruptions to housing, unexpected surprises, but also based on the position of Uranus, continuing austerities, right? That we've seen farmers really being hurt very badly by the decision to pull away subsidies in the budget bill for 2025, the granting of $20 billion to Argentina, which almost immediately used it to start exporting soybeans instead of the US to China. Messy, messy. Fifth house is Cancer. And here we have Jupiter present, that idea of the head of government. We also have the lot of fortune here, which is that circle with the cross through it, or the X. And uh, and this represents the fashion and entertainment industries as well as retailers and the production of luxury goods. And it also represents the minority party in Congress. It's taken me a long time to understand this because it does not refer to the Democrats. It refers to which party has fewer actual voters, which party represents a smaller number of of overall populace. And here with Jupiter in Gemini, um, they're facing a lot of hate and a lot of difficulty, but the going is good, right? The lot of fortune means that they have the greatest freedom to choose what actions to take. The presence of Jupiter here says that they're able to deliver to the elites, the retail goods and the fashion and the entertainment that they want, and that they're able to think through and identify what possibilities they want for the future. And they're able to do this uninterrupted for a full 12 months up through March of next year, 2026. With Mars in Cancer in the sixth house, we have law enforcement and troops being used against the working class, but not happy about it, right? That there's a level of discontent with Mars being in Cancer because this is a place of exile for Mars. And Mars in this particular case is in the third decan of Cancer, which is associated with the goddess Hecate in Greek mythology, but is also called the overflowing cup. It is, and in the tarot, it is the young man seated under the tree while three cups are seated on the ground in front of him, and another cup is being offered to him magically from out of a cloud. And he's like, "Is this all you've got?" Right? The military is discontented with this role, and so is law enforcement. Seventh house is foreign relations. How does the U.S. relate to its overseas foreign partners? And with the sun in the third house, there is a trine here. So generally, this government is going to enjoy favorable relations with foreign powers. On the other hand, those foreign powers are slowly waking up over the course of 12 months to what's going on and may feel differently next year than they do this year. The eighth house represents the U.S. bureaucratic establishment. How do government agencies work? And the only thing that we have going for it here is the South Node. The bureaucracy is getting shit on, and experts are being widely ignored. Ninth house represents higher education, religion, and the tourism and travel industry. And we've got Libra here, ruled by Venus. Venus is in opposition. So a lot of challenges to the airline industry, to the hotel industry, to travel, to higher education, to religious institutions, and all of those kinds of institutions are going to have to make choices this year about what is a practical, honorable, reasonable way to make money, and what is the ethical course of action that we should take. And they're going to have trouble, right? That the president's domestic agenda is going to get in the way of retaining that interest in uh, in the rule of law. The 10th house represents the executive branch. Here we've got Scorpio. So trying to run things in a newly law-breaking way. This weird shape that's sort of a waning moon with a cross underneath it is the lunar apogee. It is the place where we are most likely to break rules and get away with it. But it is also the place where things operate much more slowly than we would like. And so the ways in which the executive branch is keeping secrets is getting in their own way. And they are seen based on the position of the midheaven in the third decan of Scorpio as avaricious, as greedy, and as engaged in wanton destruction for the sake of personal profit, which is what we've seen all year. 11th house, as I said, has to do with the legislature. It's ruled by Jupiter, and because it is a double-bodied sign, there is a sense here of Congress not being on the same page, even though the minority political position has a majority in Congress. Not all of them are on the same page, and we've seen that all through the year as the Senate has sometimes said yes to the lower house and sometimes said no, and increasingly we're seeing a division of opinion even within this political faction over what the right thing is to do. And then finally, the 12th house is the law courts, the hospitals, the prisons, and all of these systems based on the position of Saturn in Pisces are under considerable strain and expected to institute austere measures. So there's a look at this past 9 months, right? March of 2025 to December of 2025 through the lens of astrology, and saying that all of the chaos and all of the craziness that we've observed in American politics over this past year is in fact a steady state from the perspective of astrology. And that gives us a little bit of a lens for looking at the year ahead, which I am beginning at about 27 minutes in. Let's take a look at the Aries Ingress chart for 3 months from now in March of 2026. And the first thing that I note is that our ascendant is in Gemini, which means that this chart is going to change every 3 months from March of 2026 until March of 2027. We are not going to be in a steady state kind of year where the same things happen over and over and over again. We are going to be in a steady state of craziness around what is going to be happening, and we can expect a lot of tumult. Now, that's not to say that things are going to be the same all through the year. It is going to be the case that the rules and the regulations are going to be under a lot of challenges and a lot of risks to the norms that we're used to. And let's take a look at that. The first thing is that the sun is in the 11th house, right? So the presidency is actually going to be deep in Congress's business and try to force Congress to do a bunch of things that maybe it doesn't want to do. The presidency is also going to be deeply involved with state government business. And you'll notice that almost immediately after the Aries ingress, the sun is going to first hit Neptune. We have a wild and exciting new plan. And then the sun is going to hit Saturn, and it is going to come face to face with reality. And then Venus and the moon here are going to escape from the presidency's grasp, right? They move so much faster that both of them will be out of Aries before the sun catches up. So the presidency is going to be deeply interested in influencing Congress, in deeply influencing state governments, is going to concoct all sorts of wild and crazy plans about how to do that, and is largely going to be unsuccessful. But the only way that it's going to be unsuccessful is by mobilizing large numbers of women represented by Venus, and by motivating the portion of the populace that is politically involved to get involved and to stay involved in holding the line in both Congress and in state governments. Now, With Gemini as the first house representing the people, that means that the population is going to be strongly divided in terms of its thought process, right? We are going to have a population that sometimes thinks that what the president is doing is good and sometimes thinks what the president is doing is bad. Sometimes it's going to be on Congress's side. Sometimes it's going to be resisting what Congress does. You'll notice, though, that the ruler of Gemini is Mercury, and Mercury is going to be retrograde in Pisces, which is to say that people will be very deeply invested in what the executive branch is doing and will be reviewing what the executive branch has done already, but may not have very much say in what it is that actually happens in the presidency. On the other hand, Mercury not only represents experts, but also represents trans and LGBTQ plus rights. Basically, queer people in charts are represented by Mercury. And as we've seen over and over and over again, these are sort of canary in the coal mine populations. And Mercury, if we think about it as more generally representing minority rights within a country, says that there's going to be an enormous amount of resistance uh, and efforts to slow down what it is that the presidency is doing. And given that Mercury is moving away from the sun at the time of the Aries Ingress, the presidency is going to have a really hard time getting what they want and are much more likely to find themselves embroiled in court cases and facing difficulties. And we see that with the lunar perigee, the place where we are most likely to obey rules, and Uranus in Taurus, both pushing back through the law courts to tell us what's going on. Um, now that we've walked through the sun, moon, and an ascendant, we can sort of walk the houses, right? The financial situation for the first 3 months of the year is much more likely to be good because the thing that was only supporting the minority and the elites of the country is now supporting everybody and helping make sure that the economy is running reasonably well. But we've got the lot of fortune here, which means that personal decisions here matter a lot. Third house, the president is still focused to an enormous degree on what is happening on the domestic agenda level, and he is still getting his way, right? Whatever it is that he wants to do at home in the United States, the trine means that he's going to be getting what he wants out of the country and making the country do what he wants on the level of local infrastructure, domestic agenda, transportation, logistics, and moving cargo around the country, including people, right? Um, like this is a place where the president is likely to still be able to do what he wants. Fourth house, agriculture, real estate, housing. Last year, the bureaucracy was the part of the country that got shit on through the South Node. This year, it's agriculture and housing, and expect that the crunch will continue. If you've got a place to live, I would not plan on moving during the first 3 months of the year. It's likely to end badly. It's also worth thinking about where your food comes from. Fifth house, the elites, retail, um, luxury goods, fashion industry, entertainment industry are all going to have to make some really hard practical decisions on a day-to-day basis, and are going to be making an effort to influence the legislature to get what they want. Sixth house representing trade unions, the rank and file of the military, ordinary folks in working jobs, mines, industrial workers, factory workers, basically anybody who's in a union or should be, and in general, wage earning workers as opposed to salaried workers, are going to, number one, be keeping more secrets, and number two, be breaking more rules, right? They're also, based on the position of Mars, um, going to be faced with uh, having to make decisions, right? Police unions and federal unions of federal agents are going to be all up in the presidency's grill and saying, hey, do you really want to be trying to put the thumb down on us, right? The nature of Mars last year was the presidency being able to order law enforcement to do a variety of things against the working class. Now it's the working class getting up in the presidency's business for the first 3 months of the year. Um, Seventh house of foreign relations is Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is associated with the cooling bed of coals. So the very bright and favorable relationship that the US had with most of its allies is going to be a lot colder and a lot more subtle in the first 3 months of the astrological year next year. The bureaucracy is going to lock itself in, right? That uh, they're in relationship with Saturn. Hang on. Forgot what I was doing. Where was I? Uh, Cooling relationships. Bureaucracy is sort of facing off against Congress and saying, hey, we need more resources and time and energy. Um, Ninth house. Here, billionaires are turning their attention on public religion, on higher institutions of learning, some effort to fight back. But here, it's the case that knowledge workers are in a much better position than they were because uh, Saturn being in Aries is now sextile. So state legislatures are going to be much more reluctant to close their institutions of higher learning despite pressure from billionaires. They're going to be much less interested in shuttering these institutions. There may be some effort to impose some austerities on them, but it's not it's not going to be an unequal fight anymore. And similarly, uh, the president is going to realize with the 12th house that if the economy is not good, that there are a whole lot more people that are going to be up in his business and that the fun is going to stop. On the other hand, I see the question of building the ballroom attached to the White House as continuing to be a struggle, but that the construction will go on. We've talked about the legislative problems, and healthcare and prisons and the legal system are going to be causing some upsets to the system as the court system and as hospitals and prisons push back against um, ongoing interference by the presidency. So that gives us a sense of late March, all of April, all of May, and the first 20 days or so of June. Let's take a look at the Cancer Ingress chart, right? Because here we're looking 3 months ahead. Now, the first thing is that Gemini is still the ascendant, even though it's 3 months later for a chart of June 21st, 2026 at 4:26 a.m. Washington, D.C. Just because uh, just because we have a mutable sign on the ascendant does not mean that this chart is good for another 3 months. If the Aries Ingress chart is in a sign, then you have to do the chart every 3 months. And if we had gotten uh, say, Cancer here, it wouldn't mean that we got to push things off until December 21st because we got 6 months. We do have to do a chart for each of the 3 month periods for each of the solstices and equinoxes. Here we've got Gemini and the moon. Actually, that's not the moon. That's the lunar perigee, the place where the moon is closest to Earth in the first decan. And this is going to be associated with turbulence. You'll also notice that I have Mars in Taurus marked, which means that over this next 3 month period, Mars and Uranus will be conjunct one another in the early degrees of Gemini very early in July. I think it may even be happening on July 4th. Now, this year is unusual because it's the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And in the past, when Mars and Uranus have conjuncted with one another, sometimes that has meant really nasty and unpleasant explosions, and sometimes it's literally meant fireworks, like a big fireworks display. And what I have advised people to think about in the past is that if you see a Uranus and Mars conjunction about to occur, or some important Uranus Mars aspect, to try to imagine as many horrible possibilities as you can, and then explain to yourself why that is very unlikely. Uranus is about surprises, and Mars is about burnings. And surprise burnings, there's a lot of different possibilities. But the more unpleasant experience, as you can imagine, the more likely it is to be a positive experience, the more likely we are to get fireworks as opposed to explosions. You'll notice where the sun is in this chart, right? The sun is no longer trying to fuss with uh, the legislature. The sun is trying to get the economy running again. And the sun is in Cancer, which means that the domestic policy agenda that the presidency is trying to engage in June is not really on the table, right? That because that's where Leo is. So the sun is going to be much less concerned with instituting any sort of domestic policy agenda and much more about trying to keep the economy running properly. On the other hand, we've got both Neptune and Saturn in the 11th house of Congress and the states, right? Which, as I've said before, is vision, that's Neptune, and hard reality, that's Saturn. So the states and Congress have lots of big ideas about what it is that they want to do. And they're also realizing, oh shit, we're actually in charge of making things happen, and we have to figure out how to fix whatever is going on. So I see that this second 3 months of the astrological year, Congress and the states are much more likely to be making an effort to take charge. The lot of fortune is in the 10th house of the executive branch, saying a lot of people in the chief executive branch are going to be able to do whatever it is that they want to do. But they're also going to be constrained by the fact that this middle decan of Pisces is called the net, right? Are we in a palace or are we in a prison? Are we uh, are we able to have every luxury that we could possibly imagine, or is this all simply uh, a cage in which we find ourselves, right? And I think that part of the reason for that is, that Donald Trump has put up all of these elaborate gold leaf decorations around the White House. So it's a palace. But the people who work there and the people who are working within the presidency may find themselves increasingly constrained by summertime as to what it is that they can do. They can do whatever they want, but they may have to answer for it eventually for the economic effects that it's having on the country and the fact that law enforcement increasingly is being subject to what the courts want. Third house, that domestic agenda, uh, women are beginning to assert their authority and push back against the sun's agenda, and the sun is not able to respond. Food continues to be a problem. June, July, August is the really big food season here in the United States. It's when most of our fruits and vegetables get produced going into September. Um, like this is suggesting that it may in fact be a really weak harvest in a lot of different ways. Fifth house of luxury goods. Um, the domestic agenda and the production of luxury goods, the quality of life for the elites may be a little bit out of alignment, but in general, it's no longer as serious an issue as it was in the first part of the year. Working class, um, Mars is ruling from the opposition, so some unfavorable court decisions, some unfavorable healthcare problems, like the healthcare problems that we see earlier in the year, are starting to build up and have an effect on the working class. I mean, one of the ways that that can easily come about is if hospitals are no longer accessible, if doctors are no longer accessible, nurses are no longer accessible, then people get sick and they stay home. So one of the ways that that might come about is as a resurgence of COVID during the summer and early fall. Seventh house, Sagittarius, the lunar apogee. Our allies and friends overseas are much more likely to break the rules and treaties and norms associated with relationship with the United States and more likely to get away with it. It is below the horizon, so they're breaking those rules in secret and doing things in secret that they promised the US that they wouldn't do. That may work to their advantage, but at least for now, they're not likely to get caught. Capricorn, as the bureaucracy is still getting a lot of crap, but they are making some practical decisions that are designed to protect themselves. Ninth house, mid-heaven, billionaires are starting to push back on those institutions that they're not fond of. Um, legislatures are likely to step up and protect them to some degree. 10th house, 11th house, 12th house, we've already sort of talked about. Let's move on to September and the Libra Ingress chart. Right here, we see a big change, right? That the previous 6 months of turbulence and change has brought about a much more fiery response from the populace, right? So September, October, November into December is much more likely to be a month of or a quarter of year of protests, of arguments, of fighting back with a much more turbulent population that is much more invested in making changes in the legislature based on the position of the moon in Aquarius in the legislature and in the state house. The billionaires are pulling back. They're trying to create situations where the status quo that currently protects them remains in place. I'm not sure that they're going to entirely succeed. It is worth noting that by this point, the nodes have moved from being in Virgo and Pisces, that is to say, analysis and belief at war with one another, to performance and knowledge being at war with one another, right? And just doing without knowing what you're doing is much more likely to lead to trouble. And you'll notice that the South Node at this point will be in Leo. The Leo represented in this chart by the sun. So every single time that the sun passes through Leo for the next 18 months or is forming an aspect to Leo, the sun is at risk of causing more trouble than he can get away with. It's also worth noting that this chart is the one that contains the U.S. election date in early November, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So we're in this position where the sun needs to focus on rebalancing foreign relations, right? And treat more justly and more fairly with foreign powers in order to get what he wants. And even though what he wants to do is give power to the elites and to the ruling class and to the minority in Congress, that is more likely to lead to trouble. And with Jupiter here, he's going to get his way for a little while, but not all that long. So we can sort of follow the logic here, right? Um, Second house, Taurus, ruled by Venus. Venus is in opposition. So debt and obligations that arise from debt are likely to be the thing that holds back the financial situation. On the other hand, Taurus is literally the bull. And so the stock market may be continuing to go great guns, right? Because it will be a bull market September through December. But there are hidden costs which are piling up, and we may see the bankruptcy of one or more significant companies, particularly companies that are involved in providing services and particularly advisory services based on where Venus is in the jawbone. If it were in the middle decan, I would be much more inclined to say that the trouble would be in the chemicals and pharmaceuticals industries as well as makeups and cosmetics. But with it in the jawbone, I think that people who talk for a living are going to be in some trouble, including me. Make of that what you will. Gemini, domestic agenda, a lot of turbulence, a lot of rule breaking and division of opinion because it's Gemini. Fourth house, Cancer. This is going to be the later part of the U.S. harvest season. We've got Mars in Cancer, so law enforcement, maybe military involved in trying to bring in the harvest and not happy about it. My dad, at one point during his military career, was called up in order to help with the postal strike in the mid 1960s, and it was a disaster because, of course, you know, military personnel have no idea how to sort mail, and we're way out of their element. I bet you that they don't know how to bring in the harvest either. Fifth house, we've already talked about a little bit. The fact that Jupiter is here means that it is continuing to be a generous free ride to the minority party and to the American aristocracy, such as it is. But the South Node there is also suggesting that some shit is going to start appearing on their shoes. Sixth house, Virgo, ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in conjunct the working class, the wage earning class is likely to see some challenges, but they may also find that there's some solidarity with them from unexpected sources overseas. Seventh house, we've already spoken a little bit about. the need for the presidency to rebalance a little bit. Um, Venus in Scorpio, eighth house, bureaucracy. The bureaucracy needing to find new ways of problem solving and engage in some sort of creative reconstruction of how their systems are operated. Ninth house, religion, higher education, tourism, travel. Like this is the best 3 months of the year to travel is between September and December. Make of that what you will. Midheaven, is right in the middle of Capricorn. This is the sign of old age. This is also the sign of the pyramid. And I think that one of the things that we're likely to see based on the position of both the sun and Saturn is that the president's age and uh, and mental and physical capacities will be a subject of significant conversation during these last 3 months of the actual 2026 year, September through December, that it's going to be much, much harder to ignore how the president is behaving in terms of age. And that will also raise questions about what is his cabinet doing? What are the individual members of the hierarchy around him doing? And what decisions are they making that should really be in the president's lap? We've talked about the 11th house and the legislatures, state governments, and also Congress. 12th house with it being in Pisces. You'll notice that Jupiter this year, while it's in Cancer, can't see Sagittarius, which is the house of Jupiter's work, right? Law and government and good policy making uh, and and reasonable response. And Pisces is the night house, right? That's where Jupiter gets down and parties. And Jupiter can no longer see Pisces from Leo, right? So the courts are going to do what they think is right, but they are going to do so mostly on the basis of what's good for women, what's good for minorities, queer people, as well as ethnic minorities in the United States, and are also going to start doing what is seen as being good for bureaucratic good order, but also what will play well on foreign policy stages, right? That Congress is much more likely and the courts are much more likely to give favor to questions of treaties. They're also going to be much more interested in what law enforcement is doing and thinking about the fact that, okay, things are bad enough that we have to have troops out in the fields harvesting crops or supervising people that are harvesting crops. That's not good. And we have to think about things differently. Some of what I'm saying, I'm reading the chart and I'm not happy about it. And I have a hard time believing that some of these things might come to pass. And it's just reading the chart. Capricorn, December of 2026 through to March of 2027. Ascendant is back in Gemini, right? The people, based on where Mercury actually is, care about foreign affairs for these last part of 2026 and the first part of 2027. Uranus in the first house is about to have a conjunction with the moon, and it's going to happen just just before a full moon. So a high possibility of revolt and the voice of the people for these first 3 months of 2027 being very much on the side of what are the people rebelling against and what do the people really want, right? And so the voice of the people is going to be really, really, really loud And the voice in question is going to have some significant effect on how the market behaves. The market is going to, the economy is going to want to do what the economy does. And the voice of the people is going to be really loud that what we really want is healthcare. What we really want is prison reform. What we really want is responsible courts. And you got to give those things to us. Second thing that I have is Mars down here in Virgo. Um, again, troops, law enforcement out in the fields trying to solve problems of homelessness, trying to solve real estate crisis. None of that looks really good. Third item that I have is Aries is again the 11th house. We've got Neptune and Saturn. Like the thing that I think about this is how much this is Congress and the states continuing to try to do what they have always done and discovering that it doesn't work, right? That old definition of insanity. Insanity is the act of doing the same thing over and over and expecting it to have a different result and being surprised by it having the same result as before. And there's something of this nature in Aries of proposing various ideas, big visions, all of them getting shut down. And this is likely to continue for 3 years whenever Aries is serving as the 11th house, right? Big ideas get shut down. The big ideas will succeed in the long run because Saturn will only be in Aries for about 2.5 years, 3 years, but Neptune will be there for 13 years. So big ideas are eventually going to win out, but it's going to take a while. Fourth thing, um, Sagittarius cooling relationships with foreign allies. Um, Also, brain drain, right? The US is experts, the US is skilled labor, the US is queer population are going to be much more interested in being out of the US and away from whatever the local policy agenda is. Sun in eighth house. Presidency wants to be seen as fixing the bureaucracy. And with the lunar apogee here, the bureaucracy is much more likely to break the rules that are set by the president and ignore them and get away with it. President also continues to have a domestic policy agenda based on the position of Leo, and the sun is in conjunct, right? The sun is in aversion from Capricorn. So the domestic policy agenda isn't going to be advanced very far. And where it is advanced, it tends to lead to backlash and trouble. Aquarius as the ninth house, um, the various Ivy Leagues and hotel industry and so on are trying to disentangle themselves from the political norms that are trying to be established by the billionaire class based on the position of the North Node and the midheaven. They are much more interested in maintaining a relationship with middle class travelers, lower middle class travelers than providing upper class services to a small and shrinking population. And in order to have those things, you need a population that has money to travel and can afford hotel rooms. So there's going to be some pushback. It's also worth noting how much the hotel industry and the travel industry are dependent on a skilled labor, people who know how to schedule and book rooms and manage that software, but also maintenance people, right? People who clean rooms, people who make the food in the hotel restaurants. They not only need their customers to have money to be able to travel, but they also need people to make sure that the hotel is in reasonable condition for travelers. And so disentangling from people who want them to do all of this work with no staff, there's going to be some pushback in those last 3 months of the year, or last 3 months of the astrological year. So that concludes the my walkthrough of this year, and I hope that that was helpful. It gives you a sense of where we're going. And I have made some wild ass predictions in the course of this. I don't expect that all of my predictions are going to be true or accurate. I think that there are some things that I said which are probably wildly out of line with what's actually going on. On the other hand, having some sort of a coherent thought as to what's going on and to recognize that this year, as turbulent as it may have seemed from the ground, has actually been steady state. That we've seen the police, the law enforcement agencies, the courts doing the same things over and over and over and over again. And then realizing that next year is going to be turbulent both on the level of what's happening and turbulent on the level of the astrological level of what ideas should we hold about what's happening. Stay flexible. Don't hold to any one plan for too long. Recognize that short-term thinking will serve you better than long-term thinking in this coming year, and be prepared to pivot. I think is all really good advice for this coming year, March of 2026 through March of 2027. It's not a perfect look at the world ahead, but it is a way of thinking about it, and I hope that some of what I said is useful, even though I think that some of what I said is also pretty outrageous, and probably off the mark. I hope I'm wrong, but I hope that some of what I said winds up being useful in your own planning. Thanks.